Hello, class. I'm recording an overview of our lectures for week 2 in sports psychology. Hopefully, you've had a chance to get your hands on a copy of the textbook. Um, Volume 7, a 7th edition, is what we're using predominantly, but if you can get your hands on the 6th edition or 5th edition, that would also be fine. I have left the study guides and page numbers of relevant material on D2L for you. So, material we have covered this week. We've knocked out chapters 1 and 2 in your textbook. Um, Titles are Welcome to Sports Psychology, What is Sports Psychology, What do sports psychologists do, and chapter 2 is Research Methods Relevant to our field. So, sports psychology, according to chapter 2, is both a academic discipline, which is a academic subject area on a university campus, and it's also a profession. There are careers available for consulting, helping individual athletes and teams with mental training programs, psychological skills training, mental skills, and there's also clinical practices, licensed mental health counselor, and counseling services for athletes who may need a more clinical intervention. So the topics we're covering this week are 5 basic topics. What do sports psychologists do? In chapter 1, it talks about teaching, research, consulting, and clinical or private practice. So first up, what do sports psychologists teach? Your D2L has a PowerPoint presentation on behavioral concepts. So these are the psychological principles that sports psychologists teach. And that information is available to you on your D2L slide under the tab Behavioral Concepts. There's also an extensive list in your textbook of our professional associations and affiliations. Each professional affiliation, and I did send you a link of the 2 main professional bodies, the Association for the Advancement of Applied Sports Psychology, ASP, and APA, the American Psychological Association. Each professional association has a series of journals and publications, and research is published in these journals. It's very important to understand that research in sports psychology has come a long way in recent years. Back when we used to not have research of either a experimental basis or a correlation basis, it was hard to make some sort of statements that the interventions provided for by sports psychologists actually worked. But the research that we have gathered and published and collected and presented is now summarized in chapter 1 for you. How to set up a consulting business. Psychological services provided by a sports psychologist is also presented in chapter 1. It talks about careers, it talks about practical training, it talks about the ethics and practice of applied sports psychology. So setting up a consulting business working with individual athletes and teams is a basic component of the field of sports psychology. Again, as I've said several times in class and maybe on the D2L lecture notes, until you pursue advanced graduate training in clinical psychology or counseling and become either a licensed mental health counselor or a licensed counselor, you cannot practice psychology without a license. So even though we look at clinical issues of depression and disordered eating and substance abuse and relationships and suicidal tendencies, all facing the pressures and stresses in an athlete's life, even though we talk about them, we identify them, hopefully we have a place where we can refer those more clinical conditions. But that is the 4th peg on the sports psychology chair that we are looking at this week in our lectures. The 5th topic that we will cover, and it's extensively covered in your textbook, is the historical timelines for sports psychology in North America. And it covers pioneering studies. The very first study by Norman Triplett in a physiology lab where cardiac rehab patients were cheered on and produced a greater cardiac output than those who were not cheered on. So that's the very first sports psychology experiment, and that is called social facilitation. And then you can go through, there's a D2L slide about the historical timelines going from the grandfather of sports psychology in North America, Coleman Griffith, through to the father of applied sports psychology in North America, who practiced sports psychology at San Jose State University, and that is the famous Bruce Ogilvie. And then it talks about how the USOC, United States Olympic Committee, in 1980 at the Los Angeles Olympics provided a sports psychologist for the teams. The U.S. team did not attend the Olympics in 1980 in Moscow due to the invasion of Afghanistan. So by 1984 in Los Angeles, sports psychologists can be seen working with individuals, athletes, and with teams. So that is a pivotal step. And then the two big steps, the APA, the American Psychological Association, recognizing sport and contributing Division 47 to sports psychology and exercise, basically designating that sports psychology is not actually a trivial pursuit, but a meaningful psychological support services need to be provided for our teams and our individual athletes. And the formation of the professional association, giving guidelines, structure, certification, documentation, registration for a licensed practicing consultant was formed by the AASP, and those are pivotal times for the development of our field. So when you get through chapter 1, you'll see that basically we're a very, very new and current field. We do not go back hundreds of years. We are a recent development. All the research is new. Current findings, current procedures, current practices make our field a very interesting, dynamic, and rapidly emerging discipline and profession. So I hope my thoughts and comments help you work your way through chapters 1 and 2. And next week, we will move on to chapter 3, which is the personality of competitive athletes. And I will also record a lecture summary guiding you through the topics that we cover in the personality field of sports psychology.